Thanks, Madam Chairman. To start off with a softball for you, I'm very pleased the President set the November timeframe to address outstanding issues on the U.S.-South Korean Free Trade Agreement. I think that's where we can have a broad base of agreement. This is a positive for the economy. There are issues outstanding still related to autos and beef. It's my hope that that those can be resolved. You could submit and aggressively push that before Congress. I would hope as well you would push the trade agreements, Colombia and Panama, as job creators as well, and that you would push those aggressively with the Congress would be my hope.
Well, the President certainly in his State of the Union mentioned those, and he singled out Korea at the G20. But I think you point out an important point, which is, as we want to increase exports, opening up world markets through trade agreements is an important way to do that, and that's good for, ultimately good for America and for our workers. Yeah,
and I think you can get some broad base of support. And Chairman, you're a noted economist. Is this a good time to pass cap-and-trade legislation?
I mean, the President has said that he thinks this is an issue that we need to face, and that is absolutely correct, right? So what is true is—
So this is a good time to pass cap-and-trade legislation?
We need to deal with our energy situation. We are dependent on foreign oil. We have a problem of climate change, and there's the opportunities in alternative energy. Now is a propitious time to make sure that we face up to this issue.
And it will drive energy cost up. Kansas City, Kansas Board of Public Utilities projects that it's going to drive up their energy costs 25% to their customers over a near-term basis. That's over the next 3 years.
Right, so
is that a good thing?
Okay, so let's go back to say the legislation that was passed by the House, the Waxman-Markey legislation. The whole idea of making it a package is that you deal with any consequences in terms of industries, in terms of consumers, by dealing with it.
And how is Kansas City, Kansas going to benefit from this?
So every American is going to benefit by jump-starting clean energy, by breaking our dependence on foreign oil, and by not warming the planet to the point of catastrophe.
And my
all of
citizens
those are things that need to be dealt with.
In Kansas City, Kansas, their utility bills go up 25%. Their cost of gasoline in their car goes up to them on a near-term basis, and maybe some of them see a job opportunity. Right. So by and large, they're going to benefit from this in a near-term and a soft economy.
So the key thing has been, right, how do you protect consumers? And so the original legislation had things like a rebate to the energy, to the service providers to insulate consumers. We can have long discussions on how you design this thing to minimize impact on consumers, to get the benefits through clean energy, preventing climate change, breaking our dependence on foreign oil, and deal with consequences. I would love to talk with you in detail about how do you design that in the best way possible.
Well,
what the President said is we need to do it.
I'd prefer you would talk to the American citizens that are looking at prices going up about this. That's where, and my point to you is that, I was talking about uncertainty, talking about why we're not creating the jobs that we need to at this point in time. There's a positive, we can look at trade issues. I think there's a positive, we can look at Chinese currency issues. I think that would be a helpful thing if the administration would really push on China to float its currency. And with Senator Schumer on that, I believe the administration is generally supportive of that policy. I think those are good bipartisan things. Cap and trade, this is a bad time, even if you support the idea, this is a bad time. And that's where, I look at it and that's when you get people keeping their investment on the sideline, or you get people saying, I'm not sure about whether or not to move this on forward. And it would be wiser, I would submit to you, let's invest in renewables, let's do more ethanol, let's do things that support wind energy, but not cap and trade that drives up your cost at a time when you have such a weak economy. And I would really, I'm not going to convince you to do that.
You have convinced me that we should talk more.
I think we'll be happy to talk with you. Let me, because I'm going to run out of time. On the Council of Economic Advisors website, you talk about using the best data available. You've created this, this term, jobs saved, jobs created and saved. Now, that's, you've got well-respected economists that believe this is a non-measurable number. I'm sure you're familiar with this. Harvard University professor Greg Manke wrote on a blog, the expression created or saved, which has been used regularly by the President's economic team, is an act of political genius. You can measure how many jobs are created between 2 points in time, but there is no way to measure how many jobs are saved. Professor Alan Meltzer, critical on an op-ed recently, says the Council of Economic Advisors shamefully invented a number called jobs saved that has never been seen before and has no agreed meaning and no academic standing. Now, I'm certain you're familiar with academic standing on numbers and terms, and I don't really want to dispute with you about the nature of the state of the economy today, but I think we should be on measurables that have been generally agreed to by the profession, and this one's not.
So actually, I disagree fundamentally, and actually both those distinguished economists, I'm sure, actually understand the fundamental notion that any policy has to be judged relative to what otherwise would have happened. Alan Meltzer is a distinguished economic historian, and everything that we do is about counterfactuals. And in terms of how do you measure it, that's exactly what our report is about. We go through pages and pages of saying, how do we identify what would have happened otherwise, and therefore how do we say what we think the contribution of the Recovery Act is? It's hard. It's not an easy thing to do. That's why we spend weeks writing these reports. It's why the CBO spends weeks. It's why the Federal Reserve is looking at this. It's why Mark Zandi looks at this. Everybody, I mean, it is a well-defined concept. It's just hard, and that doesn't mean that you don't do it. Somebody has to say, what's the effect of this policy? And it's just simply not possible to say, well, look at this point, look at that point, this is what the policy did. You need to know, you need to have some way of estimating what would have happened in the absence. It's the fundamental issue in any economic analysis of a policy measure.
Of jobs saved. But let me ask you quickly, on the G20 recently met and was strongly focused on government deficit spending and appeared to be saying that, you know, we're all concerned about it, but it didn't appear that the Obama administration was, of what came out of that meeting. And they are saying we need to get deficits under control. I would hope that the administration would look at that push by European governments, particularly that they faced this recent debt crisis that for most Americans saw that as a warning shot to us on the track that we are on, and that you'd put more emphasis. I understand you're concerned about the deficit, but a lot more emphasis. We just recently pushing, let's do a freeze on spending for this next year. In the Republican appropriations, and trying to get the rest of our colleagues to go along with that as a way to get focused on this deficit. And I would hope the administration would look at that.
Gentlemen, sum up. He's way over time. Okay.
Yeah, we did about 10 minutes on Senator Klobuchar while you were gone.
Right. Okay, all right.
So I was just saying, well, okay, well, I'll do about 10. And I'll sum up here. But my point being that the G20 is deeply concerned. They've confronted this debt crisis that is a crisis of confidence as much as anything. And we cannot let that come to the United States. Have that crisis of confidence in the fiscal house in the United States. And I would really hope that if you were more aggressive on dealing with that, we wouldn't confront that crisis of confidence moving on forward. And I'm afraid it could come this way.
All right, so let me first respond by saying, you know, in our budget we talked about a non-security spending freeze because the President agrees that he thought that was a sensible strategy. On the G20, there is no disagreement on the notion that our budget deficit needs to be brought down over time. We agree completely with the other countries of the world. That is an issue that we all face. And I have said before, I think one of the great lessons from this crisis is don't, get your fiscal house in order in good times, because you never know when you may need the ability to take care of an economy that is in trouble. But I think a fundamental issue that came up at the G20 is the rate of exit, because we do know that fiscal stimulus is having an important effect on the economy. And those distinguished economists that you mentioned, I can tell you from their textbooks, for example, Greg Mankiw's textbooks, he believes that government spending and tax cuts have an effect on the economy. And if you take away all of that too quickly, what you run the risk of is pushing the world economy back down into recession. And so very much what Secretary Geithner and the President were talking about is, as we move toward fiscal consolidation, take into account what's happening in our own countries and what's the appropriate rate of moving in that direction. That was the only level on which there was any discussion. The overarching goal of getting our deficit under control, I am exactly with you. The President is with you. Director Orszag, Secretary Geithner, we are unified in the importance of getting that under control. That's why we strongly supported the bipartisan commission.